Hi, this is a segment we've been doing regularly, introducing you to local designers and helping you understand why it might be in your benefit to hire a professional rather than just run to the nursery and load your car full of plants. So, Joan, thank you for being here.
Thank you,
Could
Billy.
you give me give everyone some idea of what this was when you started, what the client was after, and why you got involved with the project?
Okay, well, I got involved because they called me,
Yeah.
which is always a good thing. We started out with this charming San Roque, really cute bungalow, very quintessential Santa Barbara cottage. And so what they wanted to do was create an inviting entrance, a new place for people to park along the street. Parking can be tied along the street.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to create new parking areas, have a nice grand entrance, and they wanted low maintenance plants, they wanted color, they wanted the birds, bees, butterflies, beneficial insects, created an inviting environment not only for their guests and themselves, but also for nature. And they also wanted to capture the rainwater off their roof, take it down through the downspouts into the dry creek.
Which wasn't here.
Which was, no, nothing was here. This was just grass with a giant play structure and a pepper tree out front.
So it wasn't going to make the cover of Home and Garden quite yet.
Only as a before.
Okay, that's great. Well, good. So how did they find you? How did things get rolling?
Typically the way somebody gets hold of me is either by calling me or more often now from email. They'll just send me a brief email and say, hey, I'm interested in landscape design. And so what I typically do is email them back and say, I'd love to talk with you on the phone first and provide your phone number, or here are some times for me to call. And then we talk on the phone, kind of assess where they are. And then I come out and do a meet and greet, and there's no charge for that. And that generally takes about an hour, and we just walk around the property and kick around some ideas and see what they have in mind. From there, I prepare a proposal that lists all of the tasks that I'm going to do for them, starting with the different planning sessions. We have an initial planning session where we really get down to the nuts and bolts. I come back and I measure the space. Then I prepare a base plan. And if we're doing hardscape, which is any sort of well, this yard has a lot of hardscape with the walls, the dry creek, the walkways, the new porch. I do a preliminary hardscape plan first, and we meet to discuss that. So that's our second planning session. Once we've figured out where everything's going to go with the hardscape, and I include trees because they're major structural elements. I include those with the hardscape as well. Once we have those dialed in, then I prepare a preliminary planting plan, come back for the third planning session to go over the preliminary plants. We kick the tires on all those. I always bring photos of all of the plants so they see.
So you've gone through the design process, all of these stages sneaking up on the design. What's the final deliverable? What does somebody get when they hire Joan for your design services?
They get a set of plans.
Okay.
They're scale drawings. I work in quarter scale, which is an easy scale to interpret and an easy scale to install. And so that comes after they've approved all the plants, they've approved all the changes to the hardscape. And what I like to do is, if they've already chosen a contractor, when I bring the final plans, and I work in color, which is kind of fun. I don't know if everybody else works in color anymore or ever did, but all my plans are in color. And so I think that's a really good, because a plan is a method of communication my job is not to create pretty plans. My job is to create a beautiful garden.
Right.
And so the plan is the blueprint for making that happen. And the easier the plan is to read and the easier the plan is to interpret with as much detail as possible, that I think leads to a more successful bidding process and a more successful installation.
So I understand from you that the only way to the front door here used to be just from the driveway and then along the porch. So guests and the homeowners had to get there that way. This is completely different. What did you do and how'd you get here?
It is. They wanted to create a new entrance, so we created this gracious stone entrance, integrating both the white posts and whatnot of the white wood of the house with the new beautiful Santa Barbara sandstone. We're walking over, and this is at least 5 or 6 feet wide, which is a nice as you can tell, we're walking 2 by 2.
Yeah.
It's a nice width for a main walkway to the front door. We just traveled over a bridge, which is over a dry creek. We connected the rain gutters and the downspouts from the house into the dry creek, and it actually flows. The water actually flows when it rains, and then the water afterward, sinks into the ground and returns back to earth, which is a really nice thing. We also, the Cecil Bruner roses were on an old beat-up white picket fence. And we laid the roses down, removed the fence, and then put in the new white post and rail fence instead.
It's beautifully detailed. I love the finial and
Yeah.
and not to use a vernacular phrase, but you didn't cheap out. Those posts have a nice presence to them. There's some beef.
They're
in
beefy.
there.
They're
Yeah.
beefy posts, yeah. And then when we got to the curb, for the cars, we wanted to make sure that there was room for the car door to swing. So we did the decomposed granite for the first 3 feet so people can easily exit from their cars and then walk up this entrance to the house.
Excellent. Good starting point. I just want to point out Joan's mastery. She even accessorized by matching the paving material to the cat. A lot of designers don't think of that sort of thing. So I noticed that here you've got this beautifully done flagstone, and then we branch out to decomposed granite with this border. How do you get to that? Why isn't it all flagstone or all decomposed granite?
Well, coming from the main entrance, you want a smooth, flat surface. Whether you're walking barefoot or whether you're in high heels.
Only on weekends, yes.
Anyway, it's nice to have a smooth, flat surface to the front door. The other thing about decomposed granite is it can kick in your heels, in your soles, and you don't want to track it into the house. And it's a nice natural thing. The flagstone is a little more formal, and the decomposed granite gives you a sense that you're starting to wander. So that's
You're in the garden here, you're in the entrance.
Exactly, yeah,
Right.
and that's another sort of a design, a subtle design that a designer can bring to it, is working on those transitions
Right.
and working on the flow in terms of where you actually want to, what sort of emotion or sense you want to evoke in the garden as you're traveling through it.
Got it.
So we've got a very smooth flagstone. That's a nice entrance coming up. So it's
And I'm noticing you're mortared between the joints here. Not everyone does that. So there's this sense of having something green in there. This seems a lot more practical.
Yeah, it's more practical, it's more stable, it's going to last longer, and it just provides that clean finish all the way up.
There's some beautiful little seats over there. Let's go have a seat in the shade.
All right.
So in this wonderful, cozy little room, table for two, and I'm enjoying where it's sitting here. We're under a little bit of canopy, and we've got some nice views. So what was this? Did the client ask for it? Your idea? And how does it work?
Okay, well, I always like to include at least one seating area in every design I do, whether it's a front yard, backyard, side yard. It's a nice focal point, and it's a great place to sit. In this case, we're looking up the creek to the bridge to the water feature in the distance, shaded by the canopy of the olive tree, which is a really beautiful thing. But it's just, this is a nice walkable neighborhood, so you can be neighborly. You're on the other side of the fence, but you can wave to the neighbors so they can stop and chat.
Kind of semi-private.
Semi-private, exactly. They also have another seating area up on the porch, but I'm not sure they use that as much as sitting out here. And the other thing I like about having a seating area is it engages my clients in their gardens. They're not just walking through to the front door or to the back door. They're not just going to the barbecue. If you put a seating area out in the garden, suddenly there's a different appreciation for the plants and just being in that moment and developing an emotional connection to your garden that I don't think you get when you're always just looking out a window.
So in my experience working with clients, I sometimes have clients who know their plants. They even can pronounce their botanical names.
Yes.
And there's others who just don't know where to start. They're a blank slate. So could you give me a little about how you work with savvy clients versus the ones who just need all of your help?
Okay. I kind of approach both of them the same way, at the outset at least. We sit down at that first planning session, once they've hired me, we sit down at that first planning session and I just have them look at a whole bunch of photos, just a quick hit, not an analyzing, but do you like this, do you like that, do you like this, do you like that, and why? My interest is always in delivering water conserving gardens. My target is to only water every 2 weeks.
Once the garden's established.
Once the garden's established,
Right.
exactly. And so that's a sort of a fundamental thing to my approach to design is colorful water conserving gardens. Then for the folks who already have a strong sense of I like this palette set of plants or like this or that must-haves, I still sit them down because we can organize plants so many different ways. You know, I've had collectors' gardens where people come in and they just need to be organized.
Absolutely.
You know, it's almost like looking at a messy closet where it's a big mess and they kind of know it, but they're not sure what to do about it.
So you're about rounding things up. If there's one of this here, one of this here, let's put them together so they're in a grouping, or they make sense balancing each other.
Or we take, okay, you really have that element of spiky stuff. Let's actually add some spiky stuff over here to balance it out.
Double down on it.
Double down on it,
Yeah.
exactly, to provide that continuity
So
and cohesion.
one other thing, often we're asked to work on a garden that already has its bones, and a lot of the plants are doing fine.
Yes.
And you need to make that life or death decision.
Uh-huh.
Who's going to the compost pile? Who are
Right.
you keeping? And how do you play with what's already there? Any thoughts on how you work with an established garden that just needs some lipstick?
You know, that's a tough one. Soil prep is so important to me in terms of adding a lot of good organic material to get the little microorganisms in the soil jump-started so that they can glom onto the roots of plants and do positive things for the plants. That if there's a way with established plants to pull them out, redo all of the soil, and redo the grading in case there's any drainage issues that need to have, and then put the plants back.
That's ideal.
I really like to be able to start with a bigger blank slate, and I've gotten a little tougher with my clients like that over the years too.
That's great. I'm with Jonathan, sitting here on this beautiful front porch looking out at the garden, and just wondering, how did you get to the point where you said, you know, we need a professional designer, and then how you ended up with Joan?
Well, in the front of our property was just basically lawn. There was no fence. There was no pathway coming up. We had some ideas about how we wanted to have a beautiful front facing to the street. And the only way to get into our house was to come up the driveway and then, you know, go along here and in. So we had a whole lot of ideas about wanting to be more water-wise and more beautiful and have a, you know, just a gorgeous entry to our property.
Well, you achieved that. Were you real familiar with plants, or was it kind of...
I would say I'm probably more familiar than most people with plants, just because I've been a gardener for years and my mother was a green thumb. But I'd say over half of the plants that we have here came, you know, directly from Joan's bringing them to our awareness and showing us pictures of how they would look and how they would blend with other colorations in our front yard.
So I think this is a great place to wrap things up. Thank you so much for being in this segment. We're at the headwaters of this beautiful riverbed here. Whitewater rafting on the weekends, I guess.
Exactly.
Yes. Tell me a little bit about the fountain, how it got here, your idea, client's idea. It's just this beautiful piece of work.
Well, what we wanted to do, we needed some sort of headwaters thing to start. We knew we were going to have the dry creek, but you can't just start with some rocks. And so we wanted a focal point, and we talked about whether we wanted to do some big boulders, but we wanted to have water all the time. And what's nice about this fountain is it's self-contained. It just recirculates right in this bowl. So you're not losing a lot of water. And I think they run it pretty much 24/7. And it provides a lovely background sound when you're walking up to the garden and walking up to the front
value?
yard. Habitat value, it's good for bees.
You've got the shallow water, so they can just
And
dip in at the edge.
Good for the birds, and yeah, and it's just a lovely focal point. It's a very natural finish on it too, so it worked out really well. It was just the right size, and they purchased it in time so that we could do the stonework around it.
Oh, wonderful!
And really nestle it in.
Thank you so much for your time. This
Thank
is
you.
beautiful. Love your garden. Love what you're doing and your approach to it. So. I hope that helps you all make some decisions about when and where to work with a professional designer, the advantages of that. And thanks very much for joining us on this segment.